This bear's cub was found unconscious. Near the house, what this human baby did put everyone in tears. Let us know where you're watching from. The morning air carried a crisp scent of pine through the open windows of the Harper family's woodland cottage. Savannah Harper gently rocked her 15-month-old daughter, Lily, who giggled as sunlight danced across her rosy cheeks. The peaceful morning routine in their remote countryside home gave no indication of the extraordinary event about to unfold, a moment that would challenge everything they understood about compassion and the natural world. Jacob Harper stood at the kitchen counter, pouring his coffee while gazing out at the misty forest that bordered their property. Their decision to move away from city life had been motivated by a desire to raise Lily surrounded by nature's wonders. Little did they know how profound that connection would become on this ordinary Tuesday morning. "Did you hear that?" Savannah suddenly whispered, her body tensing as she held Lily closer. A strange sound, something between a whimper and a moan, drifted through the partially open front door. Jacob set his coffee down, his forehead creasing with concern. "Stay inside with Lily," he cautioned, moving cautiously toward the entrance. But as he reached for the door handle, Savannah gasped. "Jacob, look!" She pointed through the window to their front yard, where a small, furry body lay motionless on the ground. The creature's dark brown fur was matted with mud, its tiny frame barely moving with shallow breaths. "Is that a bear cub?" Jacob's heart raced as he scanned the tree line. Where there was a cub, a mother bear wouldn't be far behind. The situation was potentially dangerous, their peaceful morning now balanced on a knife's edge between compassion and survival. "Call the wildlife service," he instructed Savannah in a hushed tone, "and keep Lily away from the windows." But even as he spoke, little Lily squirmed in her mother's arms, her eyes fixed on the wounded creature outside. She reached toward the window, making soft cooing sounds as if she somehow understood the cub's distress. The couple exchanged worried glances. The wildlife rescue service would take at least an hour to reach their remote location. Meanwhile, the cub lay vulnerable, its condition clearly deteriorating with each passing minute. And somewhere in the forest, a mother bear was missing her baby, a thought that sent shivers down Jacob's spine. What happened next would test their courage, challenge nature's boundaries, and reveal how the purest form of compassion sometimes comes from the most unexpected source. The cub's soft whimpers grew fainter as Jacob cautiously approached the front door. He glanced back at Savannah, who was already on the phone with wildlife services, describing their location in hurried whispers. Lily continued to squirm in her mother's arms, her tiny fingers reaching toward the window, her eyes never leaving the suffering creature outside. "They said not to approach it," Savannah reported, her voice trembling slightly. "The rescue team is dispatching someone, but the roads are slick from last night's rain. It could be over an hour before they arrive." Her eyes fell on the cub again, noticing how its breathing seemed to grow more labored with each passing minute. "Jacob, I don't think it has that long." The gravity of the situation weighed heavily on them both. If they did nothing, the cub might die before help arrived. If they intervened, they risked encountering an angry mother bear, potentially putting their own family in danger. And yet, there was something about the cub's vulnerability that tugged at their hearts, a reminder of life's fragility that transcended the boundaries between human and wild. "Maybe we can at least move it into the shade," Jacob suggested, grabbing a thick blanket from the coat closet. "Keep it comfortable until help arrives." Just as he prepared to step outside, a sharp knock at their back door startled them both. Their elderly neighbor, Connor Adams, stood on their back porch, his weathered face tight with concern. "Saw the cub from my property," he explained, entering the kitchen. His eyes, keen from decades spent in these woods, quickly assessed the situation. Been watching these woods for 40 years. That mama bear lost her other cub to poachers last month. She's been extra protective of this one. He shook his head gravely. If she finds humans near her last baby, there's no telling what she might do. This new information sent a chill through the room. The stakes had just grown considerably higher. Not only was the cub fighting for its life, but its mother was a bear already traumatized by human cruelty. "But we can't just watch it die," Savannah protested, bouncing Lily gently as the baby began to fuss. Connor's expression softened as he watched little Lily, still reaching toward the window, still making those soft sounds of concern. "Got some experience with wildlife," he offered. "Let me take a look. But we'll need to be quick and careful." Jacob handed him the blanket, and together the two men moved cautiously toward the front door. Savannah placed Lily in her playpen, instructing her to stay put. But the moment her mother turned to peek through the window, Lily began to cry. Not her usual fussy cry, but something more urgent, almost desperate. "Shh, sweetie, it's okay," Savannah soothed, returning to stroke her daughter's hair. But Lily was inconsolable, her tiny face reddening with effort as she reached toward the door with both arms. She babbled urgently, a stream of baby sounds that seemed, somehow, to carry meaning beyond her limited vocabulary. Outside, Jacob and Connor approached the cub with slow, deliberate movements. Up close, they could see the creature was in worse shape than they'd thought. A deep gash ran along its side, perhaps from a fall or an encounter with another predator. Its fur was caked with blood and dirt, and its breathing came in shallow gasps. "Poor little thing," Connor murmured, carefully laying the blanket beside the cub without touching it. "Looks like it's been separated from its mama for at least a day, probably wandering looking for her." Jacob felt a pang of empathy. "Can we clean the wound? Give it some water?" Connor shook his head. "Best not to touch it directly. Wild animals can lash out when they're hurt, even the young ones." He glanced over his shoulder nervously. "And we need to keep our distance in case Mama returns." Inside, Lily's cries had escalated to heart-wrenching wails. Savannah tried everything: toys, a bottle, soft singing, but nothing would console her. It was as if the baby somehow understood the gravity of what was happening outside, as if she felt the cub's pain as her own. "I've never seen her like this," Savannah told Jacob when he stepped back inside to check on them. "It's like she's trying to tell us something." Before Jacob could respond, a loud crash from the playpen drew their attention. Somehow, despite her limited mobility, Lily had managed to tip the structure enough to create an opening. And in the split second it took her parents to react, the determined toddler had crawled with surprising speed toward the partially open front door. "Lily!" Savannah lunged forward, but she was too late. The baby had already pushed through the gap and was crawling determinedly across the porch toward the injured cub. Time seemed to stop. Jacob froze in horror. Connor gasped, and Savannah's scream caught in her throat. Their baby, their precious child, was now just feet away from a wild predator. Even injured, the cub could be dangerous, its claws and teeth still capable of causing serious harm to a tiny human. But what happened next would challenge everything they thought they knew about the barriers between human and animal understanding. Lily reached the cub, and before any of the adults could intervene, placed her small hand gently on its head. Instead of recoiling or lashing out, the cub's eyes fluttered open, meeting Lily's gaze with an almost human-like recognition. The baby cooed softly, patting the cub's fur with the same gentle touch she used with her stuffed animals. And remarkably, impossibly, the cub seemed to calm under her touch. Its breathing, which had been shallow and erratic, began to stabilize. It made a soft sound, almost like a purr, and leaned ever so slightly into Lily's touch. "Don't move," Connor whispered, his eyes wide with disbelief. "I've never seen anything like this." Jacob and Savannah stood frozen, torn between the instinct to snatch their child away from danger and the wonder of witnessing something that defied explanation. There was an innocence in the connection between baby and cub that transcended fear or caution, a pure, uncomplicated compassion that seemed to exist outside the boundaries of species. But their wonder was short-lived. A low, threatening growl rumbled from the edge of the forest, sending ice through their veins. There, standing at the tree line, her massive body tense with protective rage, was the mother bear. Her dark eyes fixed on the humans near her cub, and her lips pulled back to reveal fearsome teeth. She rose to her full height, over 6 feet tall, and let out a roar that seemed to shake the very ground beneath them. "Nobody move," Connor breathed, his face pale. "Not a muscle." The mother bear dropped to all fours and took a step forward, her intention clear. She would protect her cub at any cost, and to her, these humans represented the same threat that had taken her other baby. The rage and grief of that loss fueled her advance, making her more dangerous than any ordinary protective mother. In that moment, with disaster seconds away, little Lily did something that would change everything. Unaware of the danger, responding only to the distress in the air around her, she turned toward the approaching bear and extended her tiny hand in greeting. The same innocent gesture she offered to every new person she met. And then, in a voice just learning to form words, she spoke her first clear sentence. "Baby hurt. Lily help." The simplicity of those words, spoken in the pure, guileless voice of a child, seemed to pierce the tension like a ray of light through storm clouds. The mother bear halted her charge, her massive head tilting slightly as if in confusion. Her eyes moved from the humans to her cub, who was now attempting to lift its head under Lily's gentle touch. Something extraordinary was happening, a moment of understanding that transcended language and species. The mother bear took another step forward, but the rage had diminished in her eyes, replaced by something more complex, caution mixed with desperate concern for her baby. Jacob and Savannah stood perfectly still, their hearts hammering in their chests. Connor reached slowly for the bear spray in his pocket, though his instincts told him something unprecedented was unfolding, something that weapons and defensive measures might only disrupt. "Look," he whispered, nodding toward the remarkable scene before them. Lily, still oblivious to the danger, continued to stroke the cub's fur with one hand while keeping the other extended toward the mother bear. The cub, drawing strength from this unexpected kindness, managed to raise its head and emit a soft call to its mother, a sound of recognition and reassurance. The mother bear's aggressive stance softened almost imperceptibly. She huffed, a cloud of vapor forming in the cool morning air, and took another cautious step forward. Her eyes never left her cub, but there was a new awareness in them, an assessment of the situation that seemed to acknowledge that these humans, particularly the smallest one, were not behaving like threats. What followed was a moment of breathtaking trust that none of the adults would ever forget. The mother bear approached her cub with deliberate slowness, her massive body passing within inches of little Lily. The child, still focused on helping the injured baby animal, merely smiled up at the enormous predator as if greeting a friend. Instead of attacking, the mother bear gently nuzzled her cub, checking its injuries with motherly concern. The cub responded with a stronger cry, clearly revitalized by both Lily's attention and its mother's presence. Then, in a gesture that brought tears to Savannah's eyes, the mother bear gently nudged Lily's small hand with her nose, not to push it away, but in what could only be described as acknowledgement. "It's thanking her," Savannah whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "She understands." But the peaceful moment was suddenly interrupted by the sound of an approaching vehicle. The wildlife rescue team had arrived earlier than expected. The noise startled the mother bear, whose protective instincts instantly resurged. She positioned herself between the humans and her cub, her posture once again defensive. Jacob seized the moment to lunge forward and scoop up Lily, who began to cry in earnest at being separated from her new friend. The mother bear growled but didn't charge, her focus now on her injured cub. The wildlife rescuers emerged from their truck, tranquilizer guns at the ready, but Connor quickly waved them back. "Wait," he called. "The situation is under control. The cub needs medical attention, but the mother is here and she's not aggressive." What followed was a tense but ultimately successful collaboration. The wildlife team, experts in handling such situations, managed to sedate both bears temporarily to treat the cub's wounds. They discovered that the injury, while serious, was treatable. A deep cut from what appeared to be a trap set by poachers, the same type that had likely killed the cub's sibling. These traps were supposed to be banned in this area years ago. The lead wildlife officer, Michael Reeves, explained that his team worked quickly to clean and dress the wound. "We've had reports of illegal trapping, but haven't been able to catch anyone in the act." He looked grimly at the traumatized family. "You folks are lucky. This could have ended very differently." But Jacob, still holding Lily, who continued to reach toward the bears with tearful determination, shook his head. "It wasn't luck," he said quietly. "It was her. Somehow, she knew exactly what to do." As the team prepared to transport both bears to a rehabilitation facility where the cub could fully recover before being released back into the wild with its mother, Savannah approached Officer Reeves with a request. "When they're ready to be released," she said, her voice trembling slightly, "could you let us know? I think Lily would want to say goodbye." The officer regarded the small child, who was watching the proceedings with an unusual intensity for one so young. "I've been doing this job for 15 years, he said slowly, "and I've never seen anything like what your neighbor described. Animals, especially predators with young, don't behave that way with humans." He paused, his scientific mind struggling with what he'd been told. "But yes, we'll let you know." 3 weeks later, the Harper family stood at a respectful distance as the wildlife team prepared to release the fully recovered bears back into the deeper forest, far from poachers and human settlements. Lily, secure in her father's arms, watched with solemn attention as the transport cages were positioned for opening. When the doors were raised, the mother bear emerged first, cautious but strong. She paused, her nose testing the air of freedom, before turning back toward her cub. The younger bear bounded out with renewed energy, its wound now just a scar hidden beneath growing fur. What happened next left even the seasoned wildlife officers in tears. Before disappearing into the trees, the mother bear turned and looked directly at the gathered humans. Her gaze seemed to find Lily, who waved her small hand in a gesture of farewell. The bear held the moment, as if committing the child's face to memory, before gently nudging her cub toward the forest depths. "Did you see that?" Officer Reeves whispered, his professional demeanor momentarily forgotten. "She recognized her. That's not supposed to happen." But it had happened, and the implications of that moment would ripple through the lives of all who witnessed it. For the Harper family, it became a story they would tell for years to come, not as a tale of danger narrowly avoided, but as evidence of something profound about compassion's universal language. The local newspaper ran a small article about the incident, featuring a photo of Lily that Connor had managed to capture on his phone. A tiny human hand gently touching a wild bear cub, with the mother bear observing in the background. The image went viral, touching hearts around the world and sparking conversations about the connections possible between humans and wildlife when approached with innocence and compassion. Wildlife researchers from the state university contacted the family, hoping to understand what had occurred. Behavioral experts proposed theories about the mother bear's unusual response. Perhaps she had sensed Lily's youth and lack of threat. Perhaps there was something in the child's manner that bypassed the bear's defensive instincts. But for Savannah and Jacob, the explanation was simpler. As they watched their daughter grow over the following months, they noticed her extraordinary gentleness with all living things, the careful way she observed insects without harming them, her patience with injured birds that occasionally found their way to their yard, her intuitive understanding of when to offer comfort and when to create space. "She has a gift," Savannah told Jacob one evening, 6 months after the incident, as they watched Lily sleeping peacefully in her crib. "Something we could all learn from." The experience changed the Harper family in subtle but meaningful ways. Jacob became involved with local conservation efforts, working to eliminate illegal poaching in the surrounding forests. Savannah started a children's program at the community center, teaching empathy and wildlife respect through storytelling and art. And Connor Adams, inspired by what he had witnessed, donated a portion of his land to create a wildlife corridor that would help bears and other animals traverse the increasingly developed region safely. On Lily's 2nd birthday, the family received an unexpected package from Officer Reeves. Inside was a carved wooden bear, exquisitely detailed, along with a note that read, "Our team spotted them last week. Mother and cub, healthy and thriving. The little one's not so little anymore. Thought Lily might like this reminder of the day she taught all of us something important." Savannah placed the carving on Lily's bedroom shelf, where it would remain for many years, a symbol of the extraordinary connection that had formed on that fateful morning, and a reminder that sometimes the purest wisdom comes from those who have not yet learned to build walls between themselves and the natural world. As Lily grew, the memory of that day remained alive in family stories, though she herself would have no conscious recollection of it. But sometimes, when they walked in the woods and a distant rustling would catch her attention, she would stop and listen with an expression of curious recognition, as if hearing the echo of a conversation from long ago, one carried out without words, in the universal language of compassion. Years later, when Lily was 7 and articulate beyond her years, she surprised her parents by asking to visit the spot where they had found the bear cub. Standing in their front yard, she looked toward the forest edge with thoughtful eyes. "Do you think they remember me?" she asked, her voice soft with wonder. Jacob knelt beside his daughter, following her gaze toward the trees. "I think," he said carefully, "that some connections leave marks that never truly fade." As if in answer, a bird called from the forest edge, a clear, piercing note that seemed to hang in the air between past and present, between what is understood and what remains mysterious in the bonds that can form between all living beings. And somewhere deep in the woods, a mother bear paused in her foraging, her head lifting at a familiar scent carried on the breeze, the faint, almost remembered fragrance of a kindness once shown, a compassion freely given, and a bridge briefly built between two worlds that were never meant to be entirely separate. As Lily grew into adolescence, the story of her encounter with the bears became something of a legend in their small community. While some dismissed it as an exaggerated tale, those who had witnessed it firsthand knew the truth. The wooden bear carving remained on her shelf, a tangible reminder of something extraordinary that had occurred before her conscious memory began. When Lily turned 13, the Harper family faced an unexpected challenge. The large tracts of forest surrounding their home, including the areas where their bears likely still roamed, were purchased by Eastern Ridge Development Corporation, a company with plans to clear the land for an exclusive vacation community. "They can't just destroy everything," Lily protested during a tense family dinner after hearing the news. Her childhood gentleness had evolved into passionate advocacy, her connection to the natural world deepening with each passing year. "Those forests are home to countless animals. What about the bears? What about all the creatures that need that land to survive?" Jacob sighed, setting down his fork. The situation felt painfully personal to their family. "The development company owns the land now, sweetheart. They have the legal right to build there." "But it's not right," Lily insisted, her eyes flashing with the same determination they'd seen when she was a toddler reaching for that injured cub. "There has to be something we can do." Savannah and Jacob exchanged glances across the table. Their daughter had always possessed a unique sensitivity to the natural world, a gift they had nurtured over the years. Now, perhaps, it was time to show her how such gifts could be channeled into action. "Maybe there is," Savannah said thoughtfully. "The development plans still need to be approved by the county. There will be public hearings where concerned citizens can speak." What began as a family's private worry soon blossomed into community action. Lily, despite her youth, became the unexpected face of local conservation efforts. The story of her childhood encounter with the bear family, documented in that viral photograph and verified by wildlife officials, gave her a platform and credibility that few teenagers could claim. With her parents' guidance and Connor Adams' support, Lily prepared to address the County Planning Commission. She spent weeks researching local wildlife populations, consulting with environmental scientists from the state university, and gathering signatures for a petition to protect at least part of the forest as a designated wildlife corridor. The night before the hearing, as Lily rehearsed her presentation in the living room, an unexpected visitor arrived at their door. Officer Michael Reeves, now the regional wildlife director, stood on their porch with a folder tucked under his arm. "I thought this might help," he said, handing the folder to Lily. Inside were tracking data and photographs documenting the movements of several bear families in the threatened forest, including one particular mother and her now-grown cub, identifiable by the distinctive scar pattern on the younger bear's side. "They're still there," Lily breathed, her fingers tracing the outline of the bears in the photos. "After all these years." Officer Reeves nodded. "Bears can live 20 to 30 years in the wild, and they're territorial. They tend to stay in the areas they know." He hesitated, then added, "What you're doing, Lily, it matters. Not just for these bears, but for all the wildlife that depends on these forests." The public hearing the next day was contentious. Representatives from Eastern Ridge presented glossy renderings of luxury cabins and recreational amenities, promising economic benefits and jobs for the community. They spoke of minimal environmental impact and responsible development practices, with the smooth confidence of those accustomed to getting their way. When Lily's turn came to speak, the room fell silent. At 13, she stood out among the adults who had presented before her. Some of the development executives exchanged dismissive glances, clearly not expecting to be challenged by someone so young. But as Lily began to speak, her voice clear and unwavering despite her nerves, the mood in the room shifted. She didn't just present ecological facts or make emotional appeals. She told a story, her story, of a moment when a child's compassion had bridged the divide between human and wild. She showed the tracking data, the photographs of the bears whose lives would be upended by the development. "These aren't just anonymous animals," she concluded, her voice carrying to every corner of the packed meeting room. "They're individuals with memories and connections. That mother bear remembered me, a human child who once helped her baby. She chose trust over fear in that moment. Shouldn't we do the same? Shouldn't we find a way to coexist rather than destroy?" The room erupted in applause, but the battle was far from over. Eastern Ridge's lead developer, Maxwell Thornton, approached Lily and her parents after the hearing, his expression unreadable. "That was quite a performance, young lady," he said, his voice carrying a hint of grudging respect beneath its professional polish. "But sentiment doesn't change economic realities. This development is worth millions to our investors." "It's worth more than money to us," Lily replied, meeting his gaze steadily. Something flickered in Thornton's eyes. Recognition, perhaps, or memory. "You know," he said more quietly, "I have a daughter about your age. She's been following your story online, keeps asking me questions I don't have good answers for." This unexpected personal revelation created a small opening, a crack in the corporate armor that the Harpers and their growing coalition of supporters were quick to exploit. Over the following weeks, they proposed a compromise, a modified development plan that would preserve a 3-mile-wide corridor of forest connecting to adjacent protected lands, allowing wildlife to move safely through the area. The negotiations were tense, with multiple setbacks and moments when agreement seemed impossible. But Lily's unwavering commitment and the growing community support eventually brought Eastern Ridge back to the table. The turning point came when Maxwell Thornton's own daughter, inspired by Lily's advocacy, joined the conservation efforts, creating both personal and public relations complications for the developer. 4 months after that first contentious hearing, a compromise was reached. Eastern Ridge would proceed with a scaled-back development while donating a significant portion of the land as a permanent wildlife preserve, including the territory where Lily's bears had been tracked. The preserve would become part of a larger conservation corridor designed to protect wildlife movement throughout the region. On the day the agreement was finalized, Lily stood with her parents at the edge of the forest, the same spot where, 12 years earlier, a toddler had reached out to comfort an injured cub. "Do you think they know?" she asked, echoing her childhood question. "Do you think they understand what almost happened, and that they're safe now?" Jacob put his arm around his daughter's shoulders, immensely proud of what she had accomplished. "Animals understand more than we give them credit for," he said. "They sense changes in their environment, threats to their home. And now, thanks to you, they won't have to face those threats." Savannah added softly, "That mother bear recognized you years ago. Who's to say she doesn't somehow know that you've protected her home?" As if in answer to this question, a strange coincidence occurred the following week. Connor Adams, now in his 80s but still sharp-eyed, called the Harper household early one morning, his voice vibrating with excitement. "You need to come over," he said cryptically. "Bring Lily. There's something she needs to see." When they arrived at his property, which bordered the newly established wildlife preserve, Connor led them silently to his back porch. There, placed carefully on the wooden railing, was a perfect honeycomb. Golden, glistening with honey, and unmistakably left by deliberate action rather than chance. "Bears," Connor said simply, pointing to distinctive claw marks on his porch post. "They've never done anything like this before. Been watching wildlife here for 50 years, and I've never seen bears leave something behind like this. It's almost like—" He didn't finish the thought. He didn't need to. Some things defied scientific explanation, venturing into the realm where truth and myth intertwined. Whether the honeycomb was truly a gift, a form of communication from creatures with more awareness than humans typically credited them with, or merely a strange coincidence, it held meaning for Lily and her family. They accepted the honeycomb with the reverence of those receiving a rare blessing, understanding that some connections transcend species and time, leaving marks on both the human heart and the wild consciousness of the forest. The story of Lily and the bears continued to spread, evolving from local legend to a case study discussed in wildlife management courses and cited in research papers about human-animal relationships. As Lily grew into adulthood, her early experience shaped her educational choices and career path. She studied wildlife biology and conservation policy, eventually returning to her home community to establish the Forest Bridge Initiative, a nonprofit organization dedicated to creating wildlife corridors between fragmented habitats. By the time Lily reached her mid-20s, the initiative had helped preserve thousands of acres across 3 states, creating safe passages for bears, deer, wolves, and countless other species, struggling to adapt to human encroachment on their territories. Her work received national recognition, including a prestigious environmental award presented at a ceremony in Washington, D.C. But for all her public accomplishments, it was the private moments that resonated most deeply. On her 25th birthday, Lily returned alone to the forest edge near her childhood home. The development that had once threatened the area was now a modest eco-resort, its design harmonized with the surrounding environment, and its operations governed by strict conservation guidelines, another compromise born from that pivotal battle years ago. The wildlife preserve stretched before her, a living testament to what determined advocacy could accomplish. Somewhere within those protected acres, descendants of her bears continued their lives, part of an ecosystem now secured for generations to come. As Lily stood there, breathing in the familiar scents of pine and wild earth, a distant rustling caught her attention. She remained perfectly still, her senses attuned to the forest in a way few humans achieved. And there, at the boundary between meadow and woods, she glimpsed a bear, larger than she remembered, with a distinctive pattern of gray around her muzzle, signs of advanced age in a species that rarely lived beyond 25 years in the wild. Their eyes met across the distance, human and bear, in a moment of mutual recognition that transcended normal animal behavior. The old bear paused, studying Lily with an intelligence that seemed to hold memory within it. Then, unhurried, she turned and ambled back into the protective embrace of the forest. Her movements dignified despite her age. Was it the same mother bear from all those years ago? Scientific probability argued against it. The timing at the edge of possibility, the likelihood of such a reunion vanishingly small. Yet something in Lily's heart recognized this creature, felt the circle of their shared story completing itself in this quiet, unremarkable moment that would never make headlines or research papers. That evening, as she joined her parents for a celebration dinner, Lily shared the experience with the only 2 people who might fully understand its significance. "I can't prove it was her," she admitted, her eyes bright with emotion. "But I believe it was, and I think she came to say goodbye." Savannah reached across the table to squeeze her daughter's hand. "Some things don't need scientific proof to be true," she said softly. "Some things we just know." 2 months later, wildlife officers found an elderly female bear who had died peacefully in her sleep in a sun-dappled clearing within the preserve. Examining her remains, they noted a pattern of old scars that matched their historical records, the mother bear from the Harper incident all those years ago. She had lived a remarkably long life for her species, producing several more cubs who now roamed the protected forests with their own young. At Lily's request, a simple marker was placed near where the bear had chosen to end her journey. Not a human memorial that would disturb the natural setting, but a carefully positioned boulder engraved with a single paw print. It stood as a subtle reminder of an extraordinary connection between species, a testament to compassion freely given and somehow, against all odds, remembered and returned. Years continued to pass. The Harper family's story became woven into the fabric of local culture, taught in schools as a lesson in environmental stewardship, referenced when difficult decisions arose about balancing human needs with wildlife protection. Lily's career flourished, her childhood experience blossoming into a lifetime of meaningful work, protecting the creatures and places that had shaped her understanding of the world. On the 20th anniversary of the bear cub rescue, a special exhibition opened at the county's Natural History Museum. Centered around the famous photograph of toddler Lily and the bears, it expanded to document the conservation efforts that had followed. The wildlife corridors now linking vast swaths of habitat, and the gradual shift in how humans in the region related to the wild creatures sharing their landscape. At the opening reception, now retired Officer Reeves approached Lily with a reflective smile. "You know," he said, watching families with young children explore the interactive displays. "In my 40 years of wildlife work, I learned that animals usually give us exactly one chance to do the right thing. Your family took that chance when you were little." Lily nodded, understanding the deeper truth in his words. "And sometimes," she added, "it takes a child to show adults what the right thing looks like." As she moved through the exhibition, Lily paused before a life-sized diorama depicting the moment when her tiny hand had reached out to touch an injured cub while its mother watched. The museum had done an impressive job recreating the scene, but Lily knew the full reality could never be captured in still figures or printed words. The real magic had been in the connection itself, that inexplicable bridge between human compassion and wild trust that had formed in an instant when a toddler acted from pure instinct, unhindered by the fears and hesitations that adults accumulate through life. It was a bridge that had altered not just one family's path, but an entire community's relationship with the natural world. That night, after the reception ended, Lily took her own daughter, 5-year-old Amber, to the edge of the preserve. Together they stood quietly, watching fireflies rise from the meadow grasses, while the ancient trees stood sentinel against the darkening sky. "Mommy," Amber whispered, her small hand warm in Lily's. "Do you think I'll ever meet a bear like you did?" Lily smiled down at her child, recognizing in those curious eyes the same openness she had once carried unknowingly into an extraordinary encounter. "The world is full of unexpected connections, sweetheart," she answered. "But the most important thing is to keep your heart open to them when they appear." As if confirming her words, a chorus of night sounds rose from the forest. Crickets and frogs, the distant call of an owl, and, just at the edge of hearing, the soft shuffling of creatures moving through underbrush. The preserved forest breathed with life, its rhythms continuing as they had for centuries before humans arrived and would for centuries after, thanks in part to a moment of connection between a child and a wild creature that had rippled outward through time. Amber leaned against her mother's side, absorbing the sounds and scents of the living forest. "I think I hear them," she whispered. "The bears? They're saying thank you." Lily didn't correct her daughter's fanciful interpretation. In the space where science ended and mystery began, there was room for such beautiful possibilities. That gratitude might flow between species, that compassion might be recognized across the boundaries that seemed to separate human from wild, that a single act of kindness might echo through generations. And perhaps, in the deepest heart of the forest, where human understanding could never fully reach. The bears did indeed remember, carrying in their wild consciousness the story of a time when the smallest human had reached out with healing hands, bridging worlds that were separate yet eternally connected in the great web of life. The tranquility of that moment between mother and daughter at the forest's edge would soon be tested by events neither could have anticipated. 6 months after the museum exhibition opened, a massive wildfire, sparked by an unusually severe lightning storm after months of drought, tore through the region's western forests. While the Harper Wildlife Preserve was spared the worst devastation thanks to its eastern location, nearly 30% of the connected forest corridors Lily had worked so hard to establish were damaged or destroyed. The community rallied immediately. Emergency response teams worked tirelessly to contain the blaze, evacuate threatened areas, and rescue wildlife where possible. Lily found herself at the center of relief efforts, coordinating with wildlife officials to assess the damage and develop recovery strategies for both the ecosystem and its animal inhabitants. The displaced wildlife will migrate toward the untouched areas, Officer Reeves explained during an emergency meeting at the Forest Bridge Initiative headquarters. That means increased pressure on the Harper Preserve and surrounding territories. Bears, deer, wolves, they'll all be competing for limited resources in a smaller area. Lily studied the satellite imagery of the burn zones, her heart heavy with the magnitude of loss. We need to establish emergency feeding stations at strategic points, she suggested, and temporary wildlife crossings where the fire cut through migration routes. Otherwise, we'll see desperate animals moving into residential areas in search of food. What followed was an unprecedented collaboration between government agencies, conservation groups, and local residents. The community that had once been divided over development issues now found common purpose in healing their shared landscape. Even Eastern Ridge, the development company that had once sought to clear the forest, contributed resources and equipment to the recovery effort. Maxwell Thornton, now semi-retired but still influential, personally oversaw his company's participation. "My daughter would never forgive me if I didn't help," he told Lily with a rueful smile when they crossed paths at a volunteer coordination center. "Besides, I've come to appreciate these forests myself over the years. Funny how things change." As fall turned to winter, the immediate crisis stabilized. But the ecosystem's recovery would take decades, and the wildlife displacement created new challenges. Trail cameras throughout the Harper Preserve detected unprecedented numbers of bears, including several family groups that appeared to be establishing new territories after losing their homes to the fire. Then came the incident that would once again test the delicate balance between human and wild. On a crisp December morning, Lily received an urgent call from Connor Adams' grandson, who had taken over the property after the elderly man's passing 2 years prior. "There's a situation here," Jason Adams explained, his voice tense. "A mother bear and 2 cubs bedded down under my back porch. I think the mother is injured. She's moving strangely and seems reluctant to leave. Animal control says they'll have to tranquilize them and relocate them to a facility, but I remembered the history here and thought you should know before they take action." Within 20 minutes, Lily arrived at the Adams property, accompanied by a wildlife veterinarian from her organization. The situation was indeed delicate. The mother bear had a severe burn on her hind leg, likely sustained during the wildfire months earlier. The wound had become infected, leaving her weakened and unable to travel far with her young cubs. She had sought the shelter in the one place that might have held some ancestral memory of safety. "These could be descendants of your bears," Dr. Elena Vasquez, the wildlife veterinarian, observed quietly as they watched the family from a safe distance. Bears pass down knowledge of territories through generations. If the mother or grandmother of this bear had a positive experience with humans in this area, the implication hung in the air between them. Was it possible that some memory of trust had been passed down through bear generations, leading this injured mother to seek help where her ancestor had once found it? Animal control officers arrived, equipment ready for a standard tranquilize and relocate operation. But Lily proposed an alternative solution, one that would require exceptional cooperation from both humans and bears. If we can treat her here without separating the family or moving them to a strange environment, she'll have a better chance of recovery, Lily argued. The cubs need to stay with their mother and she needs rest more than relocation stress. What followed was a remarkable experiment in coexistence. With special permission from wildlife authorities, a temporary medical treatment and recovery area was established on the Adams property. Using mild sedation rather than full tranquilization, Dr. Vasquez was able to clean and treat the mother bear's wound while maintaining the family unit. The local community, already mobilized by fire recovery efforts, embraced this new challenge. Volunteers constructed a sturdy but temporary enclosure that would keep the bear family safe during recovery while preventing them from wandering into more populated areas. Others organized a food delivery schedule, providing appropriate natural foods that would sustain the bears without habituating them to human handouts. Lily's daughter, Amber, now 6, watched these developments with wide-eyed fascination. Despite her mother's careful explanations about keeping a safe distance from wild animals, she showed the same innate connection to the bears that Lily had demonstrated as a child. "They're scared, Mommy," she observed one evening as they observed the bears from the designated viewing blind. "The cubs don't understand why they can't go home." The perceptiveness of this comment startled Lily. It was true. The cubs exhibited signs of stress, despite having food and protection. The mother bear, though physically improving under Dr. Vasquez's care, seemed restless and anxious. What would help them feel better? Lily asked her daughter, curious about her perspective. Amber considered the question with surprising seriousness. They need to know this isn't forever, that they'll go home when Mama Bear's leg is better. This innocent observation sparked an idea that would evolve into a groundbreaking approach to wildlife rehabilitation. Working with animal behaviorists, Lily's team developed a protocol for gradually expanding the bear's territory as the mother healed. First to a larger enclosure that included trees for climbing, then to a fenced section of forest, and finally to the full preserve with monitoring. Throughout this process, they maintained a careful balance, providing necessary medical care while minimizing human contact that might lead to habituation. The approach required tremendous patience and expertise, but the results were promising. As the mother bear's strength returned, her natural wariness of humans reasserted itself, even as she tolerated the necessary medical treatments. The community followed the bear's progress through weekly updates shared by the Forest Bridge Initiative. Children at the local school created art depicting the bear family's journey to recovery, their innocent perspectives capturing both the gravity of the wildlife displacement crisis and the hope represented by this one family's restoration. 3 months into the recovery program, as spring began to soften the winter landscape, Dr. Vasquez declared the mother bear sufficiently healed for full release. Her wound had closed properly, she was moving with only a slight limp, and her body condition had improved significantly. The cubs, now several months older, were thriving under their mother's care despite the unusual circumstances of their winter shelter. The release was planned as a quiet affair, with only essential personnel present to avoid stressing the bears. But on the appointed morning, Lily found herself facing an unexpected ethical dilemma when Amber made a heartfelt request. "I need to say goodbye to them," the child insisted, her expression carrying the same determined compassion Lily recognized from her own childhood. "They need to know we're not sad they're leaving." Lily struggled with the decision. Wildlife management protocols strongly discouraged sentimental attachments between humans and wild animals. The goal of rehabilitation was always to return creatures to their natural state, including appropriate fear of humans. And yet, there was something in her daughter's request that resonated with Lily's own extraordinary childhood experience, a recognition that the boundaries between human and wild were perhaps not as impermeable as science generally maintained. After consultation with Dr. Vasquez and wildlife officials, a compromise was reached. Amber would be allowed to observe the release from a specially constructed blind at a safe distance, close enough to witness the bear's return to freedom, but far enough to avoid any direct interaction that might confuse or habituate the animals. The release day dawned clear and cool, spring sunlight illuminating the forest where the bear family would once again roam free. The temporary enclosure had been expanded over the previous weeks, with one section of fencing designed to be remotely lowered, creating an opening to the wider preserve beyond. Lily and Amber settled into the observation blind with Dr. Vasquez, while a small team of wildlife officers positioned themselves strategically to ensure safety and document the release. The air hummed with anticipation as the moment approached. "Remember," Lily whispered to her daughter, "they need to go back to being wild bears now. That means being afraid of people, even people who helped them. It's the best gift we can give them." Amber nodded solemnly, her eyes never leaving the enclosure where the bear family had appeared, the mother alert and wary, her cubs exploring nearby with the boundless energy of youth. Despite months of necessary human intervention, the bears had maintained their essential wildness, their movements and interactions purely those of their species. At precisely 10 a.m., the remote mechanism was activated, and a section of fencing silently lowered to the ground. The mother bear noticed immediately, her powerful nose testing the air flowing freely from the forest beyond. For several long minutes she remained motionless, assessing the sudden change in her environment with the caution that had kept her species alive for millennia. Then, with a soft grunt to her cubs, she moved toward the opening, slowly at first, then with increasing confidence. The cubs followed, tumbling over each other in their eagerness to explore this new territory. At the threshold between enclosure and open forest, the mother paused once more, her dark eyes scanning the trees ahead and the human structures behind. In that moment, something extraordinary occurred, something that the scientific observers would debate for years afterward, but that Lily and Amber would never doubt. The mother bear turned her head toward the observation blind, though it had been carefully designed to blend with the surrounding vegetation and mask human scent. For 3 heartbeats, she gazed directly at the spot where Amber watched, as if seeing through the camouflage to the child beyond. Amber, overcome with emotion, raised her hand in a small wave, a gesture invisible to the bear through the blind's covering, yet somehow acknowledged. The mother bear dipped her head once, in what could only be described as a nod, before turning back to the forest and leading her cubs into its welcoming embrace. "Did you see that?" Amber whispered, tears streaming down her face. She said thank you. Dr. Vasquez, trained in scientific objectivity, might have dismissed the moment as anthropomorphic projection. Humans seeing human-like behavior where none existed. But she had witnessed too many unexplainable interactions over her career to discount the possibility of something deeper occurring. "Your family," she said quietly to Lily, "seems to have a special relationship with these bears. I can't explain it scientifically, but I can't deny what I just saw either. The bear's successful rehabilitation and release became a case study in wildlife management, with Dr. Vasquez publishing a paper on their innovative approach to treating injured wildlife in place when possible, rather than removing them to unfamiliar facilities. The method came to be known as the Harper Protocol, implemented with appropriate modifications for different species and circumstances throughout the region's wildlife recovery programs. For Lily, however, the experience held more personal significance. The parallels between her childhood encounter and her daughter's connection to the bears suggested something profound about the Harper women, a special sensitivity to wild creatures that transcended conventional understanding. It wasn't something she could explain or quantify, but it had now shaped 2 generations of her family and influenced countless animal lives. This developing legacy took an unexpected turn the following year, when Lily received a call from Maxwell Thornton. The developer, now in his 70s, had made a life-changing decision. "I'm dissolving Eastern Ridge," he announced without preamble when Lily answered. "The company has been acquired, but I've retained ownership of 3,000 acres adjacent to the Harper Preserve. I want to donate it to your foundation, with one condition." Lily listened in astonishment as he outlined his proposal. The land would be added to the protected wildlife corridor, but a small portion would be dedicated to establishing the region's first wildlife rehabilitation and research center, a state-of-the-art facility that would implement and refine the approaches pioneered during the bear family's recovery. "My granddaughter wants to study wildlife biology," Thornton explained, a note of pride evident in his voice. "She grew up hearing about the bear story. Your daughter waving to that mother bear last year was the final straw for her. She's determined to follow in your footsteps. I figured I might as well support her passion while doing some good for this place I've come to care about." The transformation of a man who had once represented the greatest threat to the region's wild spaces into one of its most significant benefactors was perhaps the most unexpected twist in the unfolding story of the Harper Bears. The Thornton Wildlife Center broke ground later that year, with Amber and Maxwell's granddaughter, Zoe, jointly placing the ceremonial first shovel of earth. As the years passed, the ripples from that long-ago morning when a toddler reached out to an injured cub continued to spread in ways no one could have predicted. The Harper Protocol for Wildlife Rehabilitation gained international recognition. The wildlife corridors connecting the region's forests became a model for conservation efforts across North America. And the story itself, passed down through books, educational programs, and community celebrations, helped shape a generation's understanding of their relationship with the natural world. On Lily's 40th birthday, she and Amber, now a teenager showing every sign of following her mother's conservation path, hiked to a remote viewpoint within the expanded preserve. Below them stretched thousands of acres of protected forest, a living mosaic of habitats supporting countless species, including a healthy population of bears descended from those who had survived the fire years before. "Do you think they remember?" Amber asked, echoing the question Lily had posed to her own parents long ago. "Not just the bears we helped, but all of them? Do they pass down stories about us the way we pass down stories about them?" Lily considered the profound question from her scientifically minded daughter. "We know they pass down knowledge. Which berry patches to visit, where to find water during drought, which areas to avoid. Perhaps they also pass down feelings, places that feel safe, or people who can be trusted in moments of great need." As if summoned by their conversation, movement caught their attention in the clearing below. A bear, not the one they had rehabilitated years ago, but perhaps a descendant, emerged from the tree line with 2 small cubs trailing behind her. The family moved with unhurried purpose across the meadow, stopping occasionally to investigate interesting scents or tasty plants. The bears showed no awareness of the humans observing from above, no special acknowledgement of their presence. They were simply wild creatures living their wild lives in a space that had been preserved for them, protected by human decisions but not controlled by human desires. And in that ordinary moment of bears being bears, Lily recognized the true success of their work. "That's the greatest gift," she told her daughter softly, "when they can just be themselves, without needing anything from us, when they're neither pets nor monsters in our stories, but simply fellow travelers on this planet." Amber nodded, her expression reflective beyond her years. But it doesn't hurt to remember that sometimes the walls between us aren't as solid as we think. As mother and daughter made their way back through the forest toward home, they walked in the footsteps of bears who had passed this way before them, and who would continue to walk these paths long after human footprints had faded. The story of the Harper family and their bears had no true ending. It simply continued to evolve, a living testament to the possibility that compassion, even from the smallest hands, could build bridges across the seeming chasms between species. Back home that evening, as a spring storm brought gentle rain pattering against the windows, Lily found herself drawn to the old wooden bear carving that had stood on her shelf since childhood. Its features had softened with age and handling, but it remained a tangible link to that extraordinary moment that had shaped so many lives, human and wild alike. She ran her fingers over its smooth surface, remembering Officer Reeves, who had carved it, the bears it represented, and the countless decisions that had flowed from that single morning when fear had given way to connection. A flash of lightning illuminated the room, followed by a rumble of thunder that caused the lights to flicker momentarily. When they stabilized, Lily noticed something she had somehow never seen before. A small set of initials carved into the base of the wooden bear. M.T. Maxwell Thornton. The carving hadn't come from Officer Reeves at all, but from the developer who had once been their adversary. How long had he carried this secret? Had his connection to the bear story preceded his daughter's interest, rather than resulting from it? Before Lily could process this revelation, her phone rang. An emergency alert from the Wildlife Center. Lightning had struck near one of the remote monitoring stations in the preserve, and cameras had captured images of a bear apparently injured in the resulting ground fire. "History repeating itself," Lily murmured as she gathered her emergency gear, the wooden carving still in her hand. She placed it carefully back on the shelf before heading out into the rain-soaked night, ready once again to bridge the gap between human and wild in a moment of need. Some stories never truly end. They simply pause between chapters, waiting for the next generation to take up the tale. And in the forests where the Harper bears roamed, wild and free, yet somehow connected to the humans who had fought for their home, the story continued to write itself in tracks left in mud, in cubs raised to adulthood, in trees growing from fire-scorched earth, and in the silent understanding that occasionally, miraculously, passed between species when compassion reached across divides thought uncrossable. As Lily drove through the darkness toward the injured bear, she felt the weight of this continuing story, not as a burden, but as a privilege. The night wrapped around her vehicle like a living thing, rain streaming down the windows in rivulets that caught the headlights and transformed them into glittering pathways, not unlike the connections that had woven her life so inextricably with these wild creatures that moved through the darkness beyond. Whatever she would find at the end of this rain-soaked journey, she knew it would become part of the larger tale. Another strand in the web connecting human and wild, past and future, the girl who had once reached out to a suffering cub, and the woman who had made that moment of compassion her life's work. And somewhere in the storm-swept forest, bears moved through the night, carrying within them their own stories, stories humans could never fully know, but which ran parallel to our own, occasionally intersecting in moments of grace that changed both worlds forever.